Hey, this is a podcast from Occupy Radio on Student Radio in Bergen. Please feel free to leave your feedback and comments on our Facebook page, Occupy Radio Norway.
This is Occupy Radio with Anthony and Mr. Pauling.
Hello, world. It's a world we love and care for. Thank you for tuning in, streaming, or downloading this show number 5 of Occupy Radio on Student Radio in Bergen. And I am, as per usual, joined by my fellow world lover, the delicious Anthony Hill.
Delicious.
Hello, Anthony.
Oh, I've never been described as being delicious.
I know,
Today,
I can understand that. As well as, we also, sorry, Anthony, we also have a great panel of people. The delectable Rune Storgårdvat.
What does delectable mean?
It's the same as delicious, only even better.
Oh, thanks.
And we have the mouth-watering Vegard Finsbach.
Hello. Paulie's enjoying this.
And we also have the first aid man, the savoury Adrian Dvaksdal. Hi, Adrian. Say hello. Yes. And he's cooking up all sorts of side dishes there. And we're sitting up here looking at the scrumptious scenery of the studios at Student Radio here in Bergen, Norway. Anthony, speaking of scrumptious...
Yeah, I want to start today's show with a quote, as I normally do.
Yes.
Been a little bit sick this week, so I've cleaned the old pipes out, and I'm ready to give everybody a nice dose of Occupy again. And here comes the quote. Today's show is going to be predominantly about food, and my quote goes... When I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why the poor have no food, they call me a communist. And that quote is by Hilda Camara, a Brazilian archbishop who isn't very well known, but he was a good bloke, Paulie, a good bloke.
I have a quote, too, from a great bloke called George W. Bush.
Oh, George.
Yeah, his quote is, I know how hard it is for you to put food on your family. Yes. Anyway, let me summarise a little bit about what's been happening on Occupy Radio.
Previously on Occupy Radio.
Thank you, Anthony. We spoke to Rune and Vegard, of course, about the current convergence of crises affecting our planet. Things that we hear and see on the news every day, like, for example, climate change, the energy crisis, poverty and malnutrition, recession and war. And in the previous 2 shows, we looked a little deeper into climate change and the energy crisis and discovered that they actually are interrelated and, Anthony, preventable. So today we're going to look at food and why there are approximately 1 billion malnourished people on Earth.
And now it's time for Who Would Have Thunk It?
For those who don't know what Who Would Have Thunk It is, it's just the unthunkable headlines of the week. Things that are incredible, things that have happened in the news. And the first one is about tax havens. A tax haven is a place where people who have a lot of money like to hide their money away so they don't have to pay tax on it.
I think it's Switzerland, maybe.
Yeah, that is
Monte Carlo.
Yeah, the Cayman Islands.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to start this with a multiple choice quiz question.
Oh, good.
Boys.
That's fun.
According to a major study carried out by the chief economist at McKinsey Consultancy, by the end of 2010, how much money was being hidden away from tax departments around the world by the global super elite? And these amounts I'm going to mention to you now are in US dollars. If you listeners out there would like to get a scale on it, they can times by about 5 for Norwegian kroner. Alternative A, $21 million. Alternative B, $21 billion. Or alternative C, $21 trillion. What do you say, Runa?
Well, I think I'll have to go with the 21 million.
21 million there for Runa. What are you going to go with, Paulie?
I heard that in all multiple choice questions, B is the most common answer, so I'm going to go for B, 21 billion.
Nice logic there, Paulie. What about you, Vegard?
I think both 21 million and 21 billion sounds not enough. But 21 trillion is a lot, but I'll go with C.
The correct answer there is alternative C, 21 trillion. Mr. Whiting, the tax policy director at the Chartered Institute of Taxation, said there clearly are some significant amounts hidden away. But if it really is that size, what is being done with it all? Mr. Henry said his 21 trillion is actually a conservative figure, and the true scale could actually be 32 trillion. Mr. Henry used data from the Bank of International Settlements, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank and national governments. His study deals only with financial wealth deposited in bank and investment accounts and not other assets. So it's not even including assets like houses and yachts and cars and things like that.
Wow. It's probably all underground in Zurich. I've been to Zurich and they say that, you walk along the footpaths
and there's money
it's
underneath
being held up by money.
I'm just wondering if anybody knows how much this is compared to, for instance, the GDP of some country, because it sounds really, really much.
It actually, they stated it there, and it was, I should have actually put it in there, Vegard, but it was a major country's GDP that was in there. So that's pretty much the unthunkable headlines of the week.
Good stuff.
Mr. Paulie.
Yes.
I love food.
You love food?
I've had a love relationship with food my entire life. I grew up in a middle-class Australian family where food wasn't just something we used to fill our bellies with, but my entire family, including my dad, were and still are interested in cooking, and we love making good meals.
I think nothing brings people closer together than food, really.
Yeah.
If you think about the common denominator which makes people hang out together.
Yeah.
It's more than cinema or entertainment. I think it's all about food, really.
Yeah, we had our 3 meals a day and round the kitchen table and everything. But I've also worked in food-related industries for quite a large proportion of my life. As you know, I'm very concerned with eating fresh, healthy food, mainly fruit and veggies, and I'm a bit of a health nut and becoming more interested in different ways of growing food crops. But human-induced climate change seems to be something that we could, that could very well begin destroying the Earth quicker than anyone has dared to predict. And as we discussed in the previous show, our addiction to using polluting energy sources is speeding up the process. So I'm going to ask Runa a simple question, and not that I mind at all, Runa, but why are we dedicating an entire show to food?
Yeah, well, just to start it off, it's obvious that it is a basic human right to have enough to eat every day, and we in the West or in the developed countries, we take it for granted. But there are millions starving, and there are different policies and big business that forces us into like lifestyle diseases and complete blindness to our environmental disasters. So some of those disasters that we talked about and those that are looming, they haven't happened yet. But they are coming ever closer because we neglect the importance of food and water as our most important commodity. And the control over food harvesting, production and distribution, it needs to be back in the commons where it belongs. And we as human beings, we also need a connection to Mother Earth or Mother Nature, and especially through food. And I'm very sure that through such a process where we reconnect, we will also generate structural changes that will benefit all of our converging problems.
Okay, let's just leave that hanging in the air for now, and let's hear more about problems with food and why it qualifies as a crisis that is converging. And I guess this is where I call on Vegard for some of his mind-boggling stats. Vegard?
Yeah, I think it was maybe in the Convergence of Crisis show. We said that 1 billion people in the world are currently starving, and that's according to the UN. And for these people, life revolves around the struggle for the next meal, basically. According to an organization called World Hunger Education Service, we produce 17% more calories per person than 30 years ago. So we are producing enough to feed everyone. So people aren't starving because of a lack of food. And I would just say, in the name of humanity, we owe it to these people to investigate why so many people are starving and work to achieve permanent solutions.
Amen.
Yeah, I think we actually don't need to investigate to understand it's not working. That is pretty obvious. And we've seen it on the TV once in a while, people starving and children with pot bellies. And as Vegard says, there's there's enough food, but the distribution isn't working. And why isn't it working? And the answer to that is, in my opinion, multi-layered and riddled with a variety of conflicting interests. But because we're not even close to finding a permanent solution, we should take the time to discuss different perspectives. And the most pressing issue here is what you hint at, that it's about the quality of our humanity. Say if you compare the world to a family of 7 people, would you find it acceptable that one of you would go permanently hungry while 2 of you were obese?
Yeah.
Or
yeah, when I was a boy, we were so poor we couldn't even afford to pay attention. Sorry, but this is a very serious problem, and I think that analogy there puts it nicely in perspective. Rune, can you give us some more stats on hunger as a global problem there, Rune, as well?
Yeah, I can, and I just have to emphasize that this is a life and death situation where we know that hunger is the number 1 health risk in the world, and it's killing more than AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis combined. And the sad thing about that situation is that a huge part of these deaths involve children. And to give you an illustration, I'll count from 1, 2, 3, 4. A children dies. 1, 2, 3, 4. Another child dies, and so on. So there's an estimated 5 million children dying every year, and much of this is from hunger and malnutrition. But hey, there's plenty of excuses. You can say it's been a bad year with a drought, and then there was some kind of war or unrest. But I think every year we get several warnings. Not so much here in the West, but also closer to the areas where it happens, and warnings of impending famines that don't happen. And still, we don't act in time to avert the ones that really do happen.
So what do our glorious leaders have to say about this?
Yeah, actually, I have a good quote there from Bill Clinton. He had a speech in the UN in 2008 where he was talking about the global food crisis. And in retrospect, he could say that we all blew it, including me, by treating food crops like color TVs instead of as a vital commodity for the world's poor. And in that speech, he criticized the policy making where countries and farmers are being forced to participate in the global market, where they end up getting the short end of the stick. And Clinton continued by saying that we should go back to a policy of maximum food self-sufficiency. It is crazy for us to think we can develop countries around the world without increasing their ability to feed themselves.
Yeah, I was amazed and horrified when I heard about that Africa, it produces so much of the food in the world, but it doesn't have enough to feed its own people. And we have a lady coming on the show, well, not coming on the show, we have an interview with an African lady later on who's going to tell us a bit more about that.
What is so disappointing as well is it always seems to be retrospective with these big politicians when they've finally got out of power. It seems to be an issue of power and
well, if we'd done this back in...
But I just want to say that one of the big changes regarding food is exactly what you say, Anthony, that poor people are producing for a market, because traditionally farmers had a piece of land that was able to feed the family, and they did so. What has happened is that corporations have bought up farmland in the developing world and hired local farmers to work on the farmland. Instead of working for themselves, they're working for a corporation. And the corporations, of course, do this to lower production costs for the food products. And the cheaper the labor, the lower the cost.
Yeah, just to add to that picture, there is a common misconception that permanent hunger is mainly located in Africa, but there are several areas in Asia who are also afflicted with this. But what Vegard is describing is something that is hitting Africa especially hard now in the later years. And it goes under the name of African land grab. So just in 2010, an area double the size of Britain has been sold off to foreign companies. And I think it's safe to say that this isn't the same as colonialism, but it's pretty close.
Lack of food and malnutrition, they're not just confined to the third world, though, are they?
No, you have poor people suffering from malnutrition all over the world, and many of them suffer because they only eat a few types of food. For instance, in many parts of the world, people eat rice, and that's just about it. And the technotopian solution is to make GMO rice with increased contents on vitamin A, for instance. I've heard about that. But what they really need is to eat more different types of food. And
like
then you
they used to do in the old days.
Yeah, of course, more diverse and more different types of foods. And then in our part of the world, in more developed countries, there are other problems because from nature side, we have a taste for sugar and fat. And food corporations use this when they produce food so they can sell more. And it's obvious there's no link between what's healthy and what's profitable when it comes to food. And the effects can be seen especially in the West, but more and more in developing countries. And we're getting fatter, and that brings a whole lot of health-related issues with it.
I was in Brazil, for example, and you see a lot of the poorer people from the slums are actually quite obese because they're getting all the sugar and fat into their
basically
system.
drink Coke and eat Mars bars.
Yeah, because it's cheaper, I guess.
Yeah. It's the same in America. There's 42 million starving in America, but then you've got all the obese people as well.
Yeah,
you know?
and an explanation for that, there is research that has been done, like a major study done on British civil service workers called the Whitehall study. And that study shows that in a social hierarchy, the ones at the bottom have a higher risk for obesity-related diseases than those further up.
Yeah.
And it's something to do with stress and how stress affects your body, and stressed people are often more fat. And so the poor people in the country will be the most...
To be the little fatties. Yeah, you see it on TV though as well. You know, I mean, I guess on the TV series, it does portray reality in many respects. But we've mentioned several times in previous shows that all of the crises that we have been and will be talking about are interrelated. But how exactly is climate change affecting global food production? If there's a drought or some other catastrophe on one continent, usually another continent will pick up the slack and produce more. Like bananas are produced in South America, in Africa and Australia. So if there's a disaster in Australia, you'll get more bananas. South America and Africa can fill the gap, you know?
Yeah, that question actually goes both ways. That climate change is deeply affected by food production. It's not just that the food production is affected by climate change. And among consumer items, I think food production, the numbers say that it is the biggest source of greenhouse gases.
What, even more than cars and factories and things?
Yeah. So if you look at food production, it's very detrimental. And we know food production is a big factor in deforestation, that synthetic fertilizers increase gas emission, that livestock and rice paddies are huge methane emitters, and that processing and transport are major contributors as well. So climate change, on the other hand, will create altered conditions where available inputs like water and fertile soil will affect the yield. And like we talked about in show number 3, when we talked about climate change, species migration will also affect crops and also seafood population. But so far, the evidence for climate change affecting yield has been limited to these extreme weather events. But the important factor I think we need to think about here is food prices. And in 2008, we saw a big jump in food prices where droughts played a small part.
There's been some major droughts in the US, is that right?
Oh,
exactly.
Well, now there has, yeah. But,
so for 2012, it's expected that it will play a major part because of a big drought in America. So if we think about it this way, I think it's apparent that we can't expect the system of today to handle the crises of tomorrow.
Well, on that note, we're going to have a word from our sponsors, Mr. Pauly.
Yeah, we need that.
Yeah,
we need sponsors on that.
Well, it's Monsanto, yeah, and they're a company who say they're trying hard to solve the food crises of the world with their gene modification.
Hi there, this is your old buddy Billy Bob.
And I'm Bobby Bill.
And we're from the big friendly Monsanto Corporation. You remember Monsanto? We're the people who started using weed killer to kill people. And now we're using people killer to kill weeds.
Yeah, that's right, Billy Bob, and it ain't no secret that all those clever folks down at Monsanto have made a gene-modified chicken, pig, and cow all in one. And they're calling the meat Chorkeef. Chicken, pork, and beef.
Well, golly gee, Bobby Bill. What they going to do that for?
One word, Billy Bob. Monsanto Burger.
Monsanto Burger?
Monsanto Burger. Monsanto Burger. Billy Bob, you know how much you love your fried chicken?
Oh, yeah, that's about right.
Well, I do too, but I just can't get enough of those big, juicy beefsteaks.
Right at you.
And we both love hunking down over a big pork chop.
Oh, that's right.
Well, Monsanto are going into the fast food business.
God dang, Bobby Bill. Those Monsanto folk have really got things wired.
You got it, Billy Bob. Next time you go to Burger King, you'll be able to get a Monsanto burger that tastes like real, genuine, gene-modified chicken, pork, and beef all in one.
What's it called again, Bobby Bill?
It's called Monsanto Burger. Monsanto Burger.
Consult your physician before trying Monsanto Burger. You're on Student Radio in Bergen now. You're listening to the boys here in the studio on Occupy Radio, and we've been talking about the food crisis. And now we're going to move on to something which is called food paradigms. That is, different schools of thought regarding how we should best feed the world. Industrial monoculture and the Green Revolution. It happened back in the 40s. Green Revolution, it sounds nice and friendly. Can you tell us a little bit about it, Vegard?
Yeah, it sounds kind of good, but I don't think it is. Well, it's in the period from the 1940s to the late 1970s, you had what they called the Green Revolution, and it took place in, of course, agriculture. And this revolution involved, and here I'm quoting some big words from Wikipedia, so bear with me on this one. The development of high-yielding varieties of cereal grains, expansion of irrigation infrastructure, modernization of management techniques, distribution of hybridized seeds, synthetic fertilizers and pesticides to farmers. And to make all these techniques more effective, they were combined with increased monoculture. And monoculture is if you grow the same plant in large parts of a farm's farmland, or even whole farms, just one type of crop. And this naturally reduced the number of plants being grown on a large scale to a handful.
Yeah, if that sounded like a mouthful, just check out the transcript for our show on our Facebook page, or go to Wikipedia for the Green Revolution. And it's actually the reference section of Wikipedia, which is probably one of the most important sections to check.
And we do source things as well and put links to different things if you're more interested in reading further into it.
Yeah, you have to investigate these things for yourself, really. That's the best way to do it.
It is.
But going on about the Green Revolution, the traditional view is that it has increased yield and saved 1 billion people from starvation. But in reality, this revolution was not green at all, and there were some short-term benefits from increased use of inorganic fertilizers. But these benefits have been far outweighed by the damaging effects of an agri-monoculture and the use of pesticides. This is destroying topsoil as well as microbial life, essential for the sustainability of the agricultural ecosystems.
So large-scale farming only ended up ruining the land without a sustained increase in production and even less variety of crops. What else has been tried?
Well, the basic ideas of the Green Revolution, they are still very much in effect today. That is that we still use or depend on industrial monoculture. But the premise for this is a belief that science and industry can and should be applied to food production. So in the last 10 or 15 years, there's been a tremendous increase in activity pertaining to gene technology. And with this new science, there is a shift from the chemical technology, which was the basis for the Green Revolution, to a biological technology. And the essence of this shift is just an adaptation of a new technology to an old frame set of ideas.
Mm-hmm. So what's wrong with this new technology of gene-modifying food?
Well, genetic modification happens all the time in nature and has in human history been known through methods of selection and crossbreeding. So it's been along for a very long time, and just have to think about horses and dogs. Yeah. But this kind of gene modification has always been done on Mother Nature's own terms, making sure that new species are compatible with its environment through forced survival, or that the surroundings are adapting. But with the new technology, we skip several steps of the test that Mother Nature was supposed to do. And we do risk creating biohazards that will pervert or pollute our environment in perhaps cataclysmic ways. And we just need to look at, say, for instance, biological weapons. Maybe that's it's a long step to compare, but we know it's considered a very bad manners in all international matters of conflict, and the main reason there is that we simply don't know what happens over a period of time.
Yes, that was my first thought. When I heard about the push for genetically modified food, I was immediately skeptical as to some of the long-term effects and side effects.
Yeah, we should be worried about that.
Yeah, going to get 3 eyes or something like that.
Yeah.
2 arms. No, I've got 2 arms already. 3 arms.
Anyway, you're seeing that industrialisation has actually harmed much of our farmland. Many people are saying that we need to go back to the way things were before. Does that mean we have to get out the horse and plough, Runa?
No. I think this is it's very easy to conjure this picture of dirty, uneducated, poor people digging in the ground when we talk about traditional farming or going back to the traditional ways. And this is a picture which has stuck with us from our lessons of history.
Because I dig the Amish people and everything, but I just don't think I could do it, really.
No, the long beards and everything.
Yeah. Doesn't suit me at all. It's really bad. Goes bad with my clothing.
But I think what we don't picture here is the possibilities of food security, the way of creating local community, and the ecological sustainability that we have lost in this process of industrial monoculture. And human civilization and human identity has been built on our relationship to Mother Nature. But that's something we sort of just forget it when we delve into the abstract ideas of economy and technology. And this lost connection is something which the ecological paradigm has been lamenting for about a century now, and I think it's apparent in our lifestyle diseases and unsustainable ways. But I think the good news is that the ecological paradigm opens many possibilities and that shows ways of how to unchain society and avert the cataclysms that are waiting down the road.
And get back to nature.
Yeah.
And eating your fruit and vegetables.
There's no business like food business, like no business I know.
Oh, Mr. Paulie, I just saw on my notes there that we're about to discuss food business, and
is that a new jingle? Maybe we.
Well, I don't know. We could, if we discuss food business again. But food business seems to have made things lovely for us, in my view, or from what I can see as a consumer. Runa, how big actually is food business, or the business of food?
It's really hard to say. But I think we just need to state the obvious that food is the single most important commodity that's being traded today, because we all need it. But I think what we should think about is that when environmentalists they talk about solution, it's often centered on policies concerning regulations or individual actions that we need to recycle or use public transport. But I think that food is a business where we all participate, and all changes in that particular industry will reflect back on society, whether they are sustainable or not. And I'm not saying that environmentalists should stop doing whatever they're doing, but perhaps we should focus more on the food business, and I think we can understand and learn a lot about our society and how we can work to change it.
Yeah, as we said earlier, everything's interrelated, but food seems to touch everything, you know,
It does.
We can't live without it. Interesting thoughts there, Runa, but I think the listeners and myself and Mr. Pauly need some more info before we can be totally convinced of this, and this is where Statistics Vergaard comes in.
Yeah. Not any statistics this time, but I just want to talk a bit about supply chains.
Yeah.
Because if you look back at how food was in earlier times, the supply chains were fairly short. The farmer grew fruit and vegetables, which he used himself or sold directly to the end user. And the same went for the fishermen. So with grain, there was a new link introduced in the form of a miller grinding the grain into flour. But today, things are very different. There's a lot more roles involved in the chain. From production, you have harvesting, often done by another party. And then it's off to processing, often in several steps done by different actors in different countries. And then it's off to a distributor that sells it on to the retailer. And all along this chain you have other people servicing the chain with things like transport, fixing machinery, you have regulatory functions, advertising and so on.
To say nothing of packaging.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that the supply chain is not really doing anything different than it did before, but it generates a lot more jobs and GDP. And as the chain grows longer, it's harder and harder for the consumer to know where the food comes from, what's happened to it, and what's in it.
And this must be good for the economies of the world and all those out-of-work actors working in restaurants as well.
More jobs and more jobs. More growth.
Yeah, the basic idea is that you can expand these food supply chains and then you create new jobs. And this is a sure winner for any politician or policymaker. You get really popular. So having the chain as long as possible becomes a goal in itself. And I think for any product chain that you can sort of get into other countries is even better, since you're exporting and you're participating in the global markets.
Just a quick joke. When I was at university, the joke was, I was an art student, so what did the art student say to the economy student? What? Would you like fries with that, sir?
Yes. Anyway, speaking of global markets, we've mentioned the IMF before and the World Bank in previous shows. They've actually been in a Who Would Have Thunk It as well, if I remember correctly. Didn't we call them a crowbar or something like that?
Yes, indeed we did, and I think you might find this info a bit juicy if you are interested in the origins of the Occupy movement, because preceding the Occupy movement was the Arab Spring, which started in Tunisia about February 2011. But in the fall of 2010, the IMF instructed Tunisia to remove subsidies for food to create fiscal balance so they could service their debt to IMF. And would you believe it, similarly worded policy instructions were also directed at Egypt and other of these countries in the Middle East. So in the main media, we have all heard it was an uprising for democracy, but the big question here is, what kind of policies did the dictators and tyrants follow? If you want to do research on this, there are a lot of other examples of the IMF and the World Bank dictating policies.
We'll look at just what's happening in Greece and Spain.
Yeah,
isn't that a current example?
Yeah, I think that's a very good example, and people should just learn this word austerity and what it really means, what's the meaning behind it, and who is actually forcing these policies.
If I'm to understand you correctly, there's no real thought to ecology in the economy. It's just a question of money, because we were talking earlier about getting back to nature and localizing.
Yeah, I think I want to use a quote from a woman whose name is Helena Norberg Hodge, and there is this video on YouTube where she's talking at the TEDx, and she says that economists are ecologically illiterate. And I think it's the same thing with the IMF and the World Bank policies, that the thinking doesn't include basic considerations of sustainability or that people actually need to feed themselves without selling off everything that they have. And I think we can also expand this category of ecologically illiterate people to the bankers and investors. At least if you look at the food business today, that's the way it comes off.
So by that you mean things like big corporations out-competing local farmers?
Yeah, not just that. We need to remember what Clinton said, that it's a failure to treat food like something more than color TVs. What he says so eloquently has very serious implication to the reasoning behind our economic system today. And by that I mean the loss of control over food production to these undemocratic entities that transcend our national borders. So maybe we can think back on the ex-Prime Minister of Norway, Gro Harlem Brundtland, when she was the head of the World Health Organization, and she had the balls to take on the tobacco industry. And many people would say that she actually won that fight. But in 2003, she tried to take on the sugar industry, and I think it's safe to say that she really lost that one.
Is that when she decided to join Pepsi?
Yeah. So if you can't beat them, then you join them.
Yeah. Anyway, fascinating story there about Brundtland. But as Monty Python says, and now for something completely different. 1/3 of all food go to waste each year. What the hell? What's going on there?
Yeah, it's really mind-boggling, and I want to get back to the point of food chains, because my interpretation of why we're throwing away so much food is that as the chain gets longer, more and more is spat out along the way. For instance, there are certain standards for the size of products or of vegetables and fruits to suit the machinery and equipment being used, and the food that doesn't comply with the standard, even though it's perfectly edible, is thrown away. And also, when it comes in the shop, it's marked with an expiration date. And when the date passes, the food is thrown out, no matter what the condition, what condition it's in. And of course, the official argumentation for the expiration date is health security. But the consequence is that we as consumers throw away more food and hence buy more food. And of course, that's profitable for everyone along the food chain. Back when the supply chain was shorter, we used to look, touch, smell, and taste to find out if things were okay to eat or not.
Does anybody know the actual policy there with use-by dates at all? For example, it says milk has to be by this date, but are they really just protecting their asses so they don't get sued? Or
I have a very good example. You have a competitor for the biggest, Tine is the biggest dairy producer in Norway, and one of the competitors, I think it's Synnøve. They get an extra day on the expiration date. They get a day longer from production, I think, to give them kind of an edge.
So Synnøve's cows are healthier than Tine's cows?
Probably not, but it's so.
Yeah. Maybe if I can just add on what we're saying here, because I do think that the numbers are depressing. I think the statistic is that there's about 1.3 billion tons of food waste on a worldwide basis every year. But nature creates a lot of food that isn't eaten. It falls on the ground and it decays. And the food is supposed to do that. It's because it's biodegradable. Even though I heard that McDonald's disagrees with
their food isn't.
Yeah, I think you can go online and you can check out some pictures of McDonald's burgers that have been
around for centuries.
Or at least decades. But the problem, as I see it, is that there's poor distribution, like we talked about, and this overproduction coupled with poverty. And I do also believe that the art of composting effectively has been lost on us.
You're listening to Occupy Radio on Student Radio in Bergen. We've been talking about food with the boys, and we've briefly, earlier in the show, we touched on biotechnology and how it opens up a whole lot of allegedly new and wondrous possibilities. And myself and Vegard actually went to a presentation here in Bergen made by 3 lovely people who are travelling the world and warning countries against using GM food and crops. And I was lucky enough to be able to ask them some questions and get it on tape.
Can I just make an advertisement for the ones arranging that presentation was Naturvernforbundet.
Mm-hmm.
And for everybody in Bergen, Naturvernforbundet have something they call Naturlig Onsdag. I think it's the first Wednesday of each month. And they have lots of good presentations.
Natural Wednesday.
Yes. Yeah, thanks, Vegard. Anyway, I started talking to a Norwegian lady there who organised the whole thing. Her name was Bell, and this is what she had to say.
Bell, would you tell me what your position is?
Yes, I'm an advisor in Development Fund, Utviklingsfondet, an organization based in Oslo, and we mainly support small-scale farmers in developing countries to improve their living conditions.
Thank you. And can you tell us what the current situation is with regard to gene-modified products or seed in Norway?
Currently, no GMO food is approved in Norway. In order to be approved, it has to fulfill the criterion of a Gene Technology Act. And we claim that this act we are very proud of this act. It's among the best and most progressive biosafety laws in the world. It puts the criteria that no GMO should be approved if it has any health or environmental risks associated to it. In addition, a GMO should contribute to sustainable development and be beneficial to society.
Okay. What about neighbouring countries? What about Sweden, Finland, Denmark? Do they have as stricter laws as Norway?
They have to follow all the EU laws in this regard. So they do not have the similar overall criteria about sustainability. So they had to accept the GMOs that are approved in European Union. So I guess in all these countries they use genetically modified feed in their animal production. And in Sweden they also had some experiment in potato cultivation.
I am I guess what you would call a wannabe vegetarian. I do eat meat sometimes, mainly fish, but I try to stick to just fruit and vegetables and soy products. How do I know when I go to the supermarket, when I might buy one of these soy hamburgers if I'm going to a barbecue, that some gene-modified or traces of gene-modified product might be in my soy burger?
No GMO food is approved in Norway, meaning nobody are allowed to sell any genetically modified products. So our food authorities, they do testing every year. Mattilsynet go out to the shops, they pick the products with the highest risk, that is soy product or maize, and test them in the laboratories and try to detect if there are any genetically modified ingredients in them. And they just released a new report, and I think the conclusion was that 3 out of 150 tested products had some content of GMO. But this is just traces, very small amounts of GMOs. If they find a product, they have done that, find a product with a higher content, then this product will be withdrawn from the market.
So you heard it, no GMOs in Norway at all.
That's good to know.
And there are tests in place to monitor the situation. It reminds me a little bit of I read recently that in Hungary they're throwing Monsanto out of the country.
Ooh,
yeah.
Not only that, I think they had some kind of a fight with the IMF as well.
Yeah.
That's right. He
that's strange.
The president or prime minister of Hungary unfriended the IMF on Facebook or something.
That's an insult.
But it's really bad if you research Monsanto and what they've done to put pressure on people. It's
well, basically, in that article that Paul and I read was that they found they banned GM seed in Hungary, but then they kept finding it even after the ban, and they knew it had been introduced after the ban. So basically, they dug it all up and threw it away, and said, no more.
Yeah, but that's the main problem about these things, that it's living things. That we do know that DNA migrates from one species to another species.
Mm-hmm.
So we could very well end up having gene-modified crops in Norway in some years.
Because it'll just get blown with the wind.
Exactly. It's very scary.
Yeah, it is. And that's what Bill, who was also at this presentation, Bill Fries from the Centre for Food Safety in the USA. I started by asking Bill to explain what he has against gene modification.
Well, genetic modification is a fairly new technology, and it's a radical new way to develop new plants. There are many, many potentials for unintended effects, some of which could be toxic. Mm-hmm. We could have increased allergies from eating GMOs, increased toxins in our food supply. To make sure that this isn't the case, we need to have very, very good regulation. And unfortunately, in the United States, we don't have that at all, and not in Europe either. So there are really food safety issues, and also even more, I think, environmental problems with these crops, because most of them, 85% of GMOs in the world today are herbicide resistant. They're designed to be used with heavy applications of herbicides, which are weed killers.
Right.
And many of these weed killers are toxic in their own right. Mm-hmm. They also foster development of weeds that are resistant to the herbicides, and that leads to a pesticide treadmill effect where you're using more and more chemicals to try to kill weeds. There's many problems for farmers. Spray drift, these herbicides can kill neighbors' crops. I guess the shortest way of saying it is that the GMOs represent an entirely unsustainable approach to agriculture. And it's taking us in the wrong direction. We need to be getting away from using so many pesticides and towards an approach where we're enriching the soil. And that makes plants stronger and more productive. Organic agriculture, agroecology, and similar methods are the way we really need to go.
Okay, so these GM companies in America have been pushing GM, and it's quite prevalent in the USA. What is it they say are the advantages of using this, which you say are actually not advantageous?
Well, unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation that's spread by these companies, and even more by groups that they fund, supposedly nonprofit groups that many people mistake for objective information, but they put out misinformation that, GM crops increase yield, they are needed to feed the world and cure malnutrition, and yet when you look at the facts, none of these claims are true. These crops have nothing to do with feeding hungry people. They do not increase yield. GMOs do not have higher yield than conventional crops. That's a total myth. The scientific studies are there to prove that. And like I said, almost all of these crops are pesticide promoting. They're designed to be used with pesticides. The seeds themselves are very expensive, and the chemicals used with them are even more expensive, so that makes them unsuitable for developing country farmers. You can't feed the world with an expensive technology.
Monsanto, it said on your graph there, have 23% of, is that of the world's seed or of America's seed?
That's 23% of the world's proprietary seed, and proprietary means branded seed that's, is sold as a branded product. So it's about almost a quarter of the major part of the seed supply. So it really is a large percentage of what we call germplasm, that Monsanto. And when you add up the other companies, the other large biotechnology companies, it's about half.
Right.
Yeah.
Isn't Monsanto the same company that developed the Agent Orange that was used for defoliation during the Vietnam War?
Yes, Monsanto was a major producer of 2,4-D, this herbicide that, as you said, was part of Agent Orange. Dow AgroSciences was another producer.
And they're also involved in gene modifying as well?
Yeah, Dow Chemical Company is also a big biotechnology company, and they're actually about to introduce, or they're going to try to introduce, corn and soybeans that are resistant to 2,4-D,
right?
This toxic chemical. And this is going to, very much increase the load of toxic pesticides in our waterways, in our food. And our own organization is fighting very hard, as well as a few others in the United States, to try and stop this.
Yeah, it's funny because if we just go back to the Agent Orange and the Vietnam War, I was reading recently that America have agreed to do some kind of clean-up there after 37 years, but they said in the article that there's 150,000 children that have been born in Vietnam with birth defects as a direct result of Agent Orange. Isn't it strange that a company that has produced this kind of, chemical weapon is now producing or trying to produce the world's food?
Yes, I think it's very frightening. That's a very good point. I mean, we have a situation now where pesticide companies and other chemical companies have a known track record of introducing toxic substances, of lying about the supposed safety of these substances. Mm-hmm. That now they control a big part of the world's seed supply, and sadly they're using genetic engineering so that they can sell both expensive seeds and more of their chemicals. And it's removing, basically through patents, Monsanto is taking control from farmers to itself, so that only Monsanto can sell the seeds, and farmers don't have the independence of being able to save seeds and even breed seeds themselves, which again is something farmers have done for generations. So, we really there are multiple threats here from these biotech companies, and I hope Norway has the wisdom to continue its cautious policy of rejecting GMOs, because it really leads to all of these bad consequences.
As you pointed out there rightly, Anthony, there's a certain irony, I think, to the fact that the pesticide promoters are actually the ones who are trying to feed the world.
Yeah, and even chemical weapons as well.
Exactly. It's just ironic. These are not the people who you want to feed us.
No.
If you had to choose anybody, they'd be the last people.
I'd rather farmers fed me.
Yeah, for example.
Just a farmer, not somebody who's developed weapons of mass destruction.
But are there any companies saying, well, we're trying to feed the world now, feed the world. We're trying to, fix the problem of famine in the world. Do you think there are any companies out there who are trying to, with a good conscience, do it?
I haven't heard of it.
No, I don't think so.
I'm pretty sure that this paradigm of getting seed control and getting control over the genes, it's nowadays it's a race towards getting your patents in.
Yeah.
To be first to the mill, and then get as many farmers as possible getting hooked on it and telling them basically lies about how effective this is and how much you're going to save. So I think the industry uses very dirty techniques to get their products out.
They try to get farmers addicted to.
Yeah, and that's what you see in India with the BT cotton. So I think maybe people should see this movie, The World According to Monsanto.
Absolutely, yeah. We recommend our listeners. When I saw that, I mentally changed the name of Monsanto to Monsatan because of what they're doing. They're not about. They don't seem to be about wanting to feed the world. It's just about the bottom line for their company. As it is with most other corporations. But there was a third person I spoke to that day. Her name was Miriam Mayat from the African Centre for Biosafety. And she was something we'd spoken earlier about in the show was food security in Africa. And she had something very, very interesting to say, Mr. Pauly. You mentioned during your presentation the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and that they are purporting
to do a lot of good work for poverty in Africa. However, you say that this is actually not really the case. Can you explain that a bit further for our listeners?
Yes, sure. They are funding a project called Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa. And what this is about is that it has the trappings of what we call an agroecology project, one that is a farmer-centered, that is geared towards introducing organic techniques in terms of farming, working closely with farmers to develop new varieties, developing local markets. But when you analyze it very carefully and look at what is already happening in Africa, you can see that what's at stake here is the displacing of peasant agriculture and supplanting that with large-scale commercial agriculture based on monocrops, particularly corporate seed, and the privatization of African food systems, so to create markets for the corporations. And this is what it's about.
So don't bigger farms produce more food?
The question is not about how much food is produced. The issue is not about production and how much food you can bring to the market. The issue is about equitable distribution of resources. The issue is about ensuring that seeds and agricultural inputs are under the control of farmers, that farmers have a say in deciding what they will grow under what circumstances, according to their taste and cultural needs, what they want to supply to the local market, and if they want to supply the national or export market, there should be decisions that they make, not externally driven. And part of the agri-push is to produce on a large scale for the export market. And this will not translate into food secure people.
Yes, she was a very interesting lady to talk to there, boys, and it goes back to what Vegard and Runa have been saying since the very first show. It's got nothing to do with a lack of food. It's just got to do with equitable distribution. We've been talking about food today, and earlier in the show we talked about environmental impacts of food production and vice versa. I'd like to go back to that because it's kind of hard to get your mind around what's really going on, isn't it, Runa?
Yeah, and I think in the last two shows we talked about climate and energy, and this show also adds quite nicely to the bleakness of the picture that we've painted so far. For instance, our current rate of deforestation will actually see all of the rainforest gone in the next 100 years. And this is, of course, related to the need for agricultural land to grow crops and raise livestock. And what we also see is that there's deforestation of mangrove coastal forest, where shrimp farmers basically destroy the coastline to make mud lakes for shrimp, or scampi, if you will.
I love scampi. Do I have to feel guilty every time I make it?
Well, if you
in my tom yum goong,
I really am. I love it. What am I going to do with
a vindaloo? It's really nice.
And there's the tuna thing as well.
Okay, come on,
Anyway.
guys. If we follow that kind of thinking, then you better not live in a modern society at all. But let's please just move on.
All right then. Sorry, Groons.
We're doing something to actually counter this. So. I think the point here is that deforestation has all sorts of bad implications to it, and that it adds to the climate change effect, and it really needs to stop. And not only for the reason of climate change, but also that 70% of all plant and land creatures do reside in the forests. So currently, I think there's an area the size of Panama. I don't know how big Panama is, but I found out it's roughly the size of Austria, which is a European country, so it's easier for me to imagine. And that's the rate of deforestation each year.
Yeah, well, that's the land. And apart from talking about the mangroves just now, we haven't really mentioned the ocean at all. How bad is it in the ocean?
Well, the equivalent of deforestation in the oceans is something which is called bottom trawling. And this method of fishing is particularly bad since it drags nets and weights along the seafloor, and it just scoops up everything in its path and destroys corals and vertebrates, and creating huge dirt plumes which suffocate the fish who gets caught in the dirt plume. So you can actually see these dirt plumes when they're trawling in shallow waters, and you can see them from the satellite photos.
Jeez.
Because they're so huge and they stay for such a long time. So I think there's an estimate which was done some years ago where the yearly size of the bottom trawling is roughly the size of Russia.
The biggest country in the world.
Exactly.
Wow.
They just banned one from Australia, which I mentioned last week. Its net was as long as the Sydney Harbour Bridge, which is just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
One thing you see here is similar to the where corporations buy up farmland. You have these quota systems, where corporations buy up the right to fish all over the world, and they hire the cheapest labor they can find and process the fish in the cheapest industrialized countries they can find, and then they sell it in the market with the highest price they can find. Of course, this is a generalization, but this is what the quota system and the market system, together with the profit incentive, push for.
So I think, it's a good thing you brought that in. But I think the main problem here is that yes, trawling is a problem, but it's just a part of a bigger problem, which we should call overfishing. And
I like that term. It's very obvious, isn't it?
Yeah.
Overfishing.
Yes.
It's nice to hear a non-technical term there.
Yeah, but okay, let me give you some numbers to add to that
into
simple
perspective.
one.
Yeah.
Because the global fishing fleet is about 2 to 3 times larger than what the oceans can sustainably support. And as a result of this, 53% of the world's fisheries are fully exploited and 32% are overexploited, depleted or recovering from depletion. And unless the situation improves, stocks of all species currently fished for food are predicted to collapse by the year 2048.
And that would be pretty much game over for everybody, including us.
Well, I don't know how game over. It won't come suddenly, but we will be struggling a lot.
So we can depend on our local cynic there to bring us some depressing facts just when we need them. Thank you very much, Runa. But anybody out there, but we do need to know the facts, and that's what we're here for, Mr. Pauly. And if anybody needs to or would like to know more about that, they can watch this documentary called The End of the Line.
Is he a cynic if he presents facts? We've had this discussion.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Depends on if it's just the negative facts, but I'm hopeful that we can get to the solutions later.
But we're really running out of time here too, boys and girls. But there's one last thing I'd like to know about, Runa, and you've talked about the ecological paradigm, and it sounded like you were promoting it as a solution. Do you really believe that?
Yeah, I do, because the last year I've seen a lot of documentaries and I read a lot of articles, and what I find most interesting is that people from separate backgrounds talk about the same solutions. So to cut it down for you, they're saying what we need is to reconnect with Mother Nature, and the best way of doing this is through revitalizing the local communities and reclaiming food production and food control. To give you an example of this is actually outsmarting legislation, which says you can only buy and sell certain types of seeds. So there's something called seed swapping, and outlawing the seeds has dramatically reduced variety of crops, some of which can't be grown industrially, but will flourish if they're in a local and organic environment.
Yeah, in India there's an organization called Navdanya, and it's led by a woman named Vandana Shiva.
She's legendary.
A wonderful speaker. You should look her up on YouTube. But she's trying to help the farmers in India to fight Monsanto, among others, and the rest of the agro business, and go back to more traditional forms of farming, and focusing on old species and more variety, not just the white rice, but several other.
Yeah, she's in lots of different documentaries. You can find short and long documentaries on YouTube. Just all you have to do is go into YouTube and write in Vandana Shiva. and you'll find anything. But she used to be a nuclear physicist, didn't she?
Yeah, that's correct. But since we're so short on time, I really want to bring back Helena Norberg-Hodge again, because there's a very interesting documentary, or she's actually written several books on this, where she witnessed the breakdown of traditional local community in a culturally Tibetan area in the north of India. It's called Ladakh, and the transformation that she witnessed was that the Western culture and market forces came in and completely ruined this local community. And central to this transformation was of course the introduction of subsidized rice. So I highly recommend people to look her up and read the story of Ladakh.
Hey, isn't this the solution-based part of the show, man?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's so easy to get carried away here. But okay, I'll bring a new one for you. There's another initiative that bolsters local solutions and ecological thinking. It's something called the Transition Town Network. They focus heavily on helping people to start up local initiatives to go ecological and environmental while stimulating local venture.
Absolutely, yes. I've read and seen some documentaries about transition towns, and I recommend other people also search these on YouTube.
We actually have a Frö member who's visiting transition towns, the original transition towns in England at the moment.
Frö, so if you want to know more about that, you can go to and join Frö on Facebook. And you can meet up with the boys there. But what about Charles Eisenstein? He had a few interesting thoughts on this kind of thing too, didn't he, Runa? You're a big fan of his.
Yeah, I do. I don't think we can get started on everything he's saying, but he has some very interesting thoughts on how we can reconnect. So people just have to check him out on the internet or follow the links that we put in the transcript. I think, just a note here, we regularly hear about consumer power, and to be honest, the consumer power is an illusion, unless you get these sort of mass movements to boycott some product, but for what?
Yeah.
What happens after you boycott them and they change their ways, or say that they change their ways? Nothing really happens. But when it comes to food, if there are local alternatives to your food from where you buy your food, you will also be actively choosing to have another society.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's a bit of a cliche, but food is power, or at least the ability to withhold food from someone is. And if someone has control over something people absolutely need, you can't have real democracy. But we have to remember that big corporations and whomever they support get their power from their customers. And I've seen this as a free market gimmick, the thing that you vote with your dollars. But it's true that to some extent do that. And we have to grow our local communities. And by supporting the local economy, and to do that, we have to buy local food or even produce food ourselves. Then we can start talking about democracy. Another thing that's really, really amusing, I think, is the thing called guerrilla gardening, where people they're trying to take back the commons in a way by growing food and different plants on public property.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to imagine people sharecropping in parks and growing vegetables in their cubicles, but I love the idea. So what you're suggesting is we grow food everywhere we can.
Yeah, I think so. And one thing about future food production is that it has to be more organized like a natural ecosystem, because a natural ecosystem is diverse and it regulates itself through different mechanisms, ensuring robust sustainability. And an example of this is permaculture, and this is an attempt to mimic the mechanisms in natural ecosystems and focus on symbiosis between many different types of plants.
Yeah.
This way, food production naturally takes us away from monoculture, and it will have positive effects on people's health, since we all really know that the best way to a healthy diet is variety.
So we don't really have to go to our supermarkets for variety.
So we can just harvest on our way home from work, or just just walk down the road and say, I think I might just do a bit of harvesting now. Oh, that one looks like it needs harvesting.
Yeah, I've seen some projects in I think it's Detroit, where you can pick some tomatoes and then you pick some weeds and you go on your way.
You have people grazing everywhere. I love that idea.
Yes.
But like being surrounded by nature is our natural state, and the reason we don't anymore is because we have sort of insulated ourselves from impracticalities in our quest for what we believe to be security and fulfillment of our ambitions.
Yeah.
But once we get out for a walk or go hiking or kayaking, it's so easy to feel that this is the right thing for us to do.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
And that's, we just don't have more time. I wish we had more time to discuss this, but it's been the most interesting and fun show for me because I love food, but I think maybe even the listeners. I mean, everybody's involved in food, and if you out there want to know more about this, please check out our Facebook page or check out the transcript that we put on Facebook, and you can follow all the links and do whatever you want to do and research as much and become active like us. Can't they, Mr. Paulie?
They can. And now it's time for
Science and Tech Breakthrough of the Week. And I have one which is very, very relevant to today's show, Mr. Paulie, because more and more these days people like you and me are wanting sustainable organic fruit and veggies for their own use, and people are turning to urban farming. However, in some areas, neighbourhoods and homeowners associations have rules that stop you growing stuff in your own yard, unthinkable as it is.
Marijuana, for example.
Yeah, and if you add in, drought and pest control and blah, 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 and suddenly urban farming seems more trouble than it's worth. But there's a growing need for local supplies of freshly grown food that avoids the difficulties presented by conventional small farms and gardens. And there's a company, a very clever company called Daiwa House, Japan's largest home builder, and they've introduced a line of prefabricated hydroponic vegetable factories aimed at housing complexes and hotels and restaurants. It's called the AgriCube. Look that up, people. Google it, AgriCube, and they're about the size of a single car parking spot. That is not a whole car park, but one single car space. So it's like 3 or 4 metres by 2 metres. And these units are proclaimed by Daiwa as the first step in the industrialisation of agriculture to be located amongst the places where people live, work and play. And I must say, Mr. Paulie, I want one.
I want that one. I want one of those. Right.
But, mate, it's really nice to finish that on such a note, I think, the show today, because there was a lot of disturbing information in today's show.
But there is rays of hope as well, I
guess.
Are. Yeah, there are.
We'll be back next Friday at 12:30 on Student Radio here in Bergen. Don't forget to check out our Facebook page or our YouTube page, Occupy Radio Norway.
Bye, people.
Bye.
Bye.